For decades, witnesses throughout the Amazon have described run-ins with serpents of impossible size, creatures said to dwarf anything science has officially recognized. Accounts of monstrous anacondas drifting without a sound through isolated river channels and waterlogged jungle. For a long time, those stories went nowhere. Then researchers turned up something that nobody expected. Buried inside the oldest layers of the Amazonian wilderness, a colossal snake once ruled, 15 meters long. The heaviest predator of its kind ever pulled from the earth, a creature that held dominion over these jungles for millions of years. Its name was Titanoboa. And that single discovery forces a question that is genuinely hard to shake. If this landscape once gave rise to something on that scale, could the conditions that built it still be at work today? And if they are, what do we make of the steady stream of sightings describing outsized serpents still moving through these waters? Answering that requires us to look closely at one of the most extraordinary and least understood places on the planet. The Amazon basin is the vastest tropical wilderness Earth has ever produced. It sprawls across close to 7 million square kilometers, cutting through 9 countries across South America. Laid over a map of the United States, it would cover the country almost entirely. Running through all of it is a freshwater system unlike anything else on the globe. A tangled web of rivers, oxbow lakes, floodplains, and saturated lowlands that gives this ecosystem its character. Each year, when rainfall peaks, enormous stretches of jungle go underwater. Territories the size of entire states become drowned forests. Locals call them varzea and igapo, where trees stand submerged up to their canopies for months at a stretch. This cyclical flooding does not disrupt the ecosystem. It defines it. And it defines, above all, one particular kind of predator, the green anaconda. It was shaped by this world over millions of years of adaptation. Equally at home, gliding through black water, hauling itself across muddy riverbanks, or coiling in the branches overhead. It operates in conditions where visibility drops to nothing. Murky, oxygen-poor channels where prey has no warning until the strike. It does not pursue. It positions itself, keeps completely still, and waits. Then it seizes, wraps, and crushes the air out of its target before pulling it below the surface and consuming it whole. What makes this animal particularly hard to track is how rarely it needs to be active. A single substantial meal can sustain an anaconda for weeks or even months. After feeding, it sinks back into whichever channel it emerged from and simply ceases to be visible. If any corner of the world could plausibly shelter an anaconda of extraordinary proportions, this is it. And that logic is precisely what keeps the accounts alive. What science has actually confirmed about anaconda size is already impressive. The largest reliably measured wild specimens approach 6 meters in length. Researchers, including wildlife explorer Paul Rossoli, have documented and physically measured anacondas across years of Amazon fieldwork, and new records continue to be established. As recently as 2024, a scientific team surveying the Ecuadorian Amazon, accompanied by actor Will Smith, formally recorded an anaconda topping 6 meters, placing it among the most substantial individuals ever reliably confirmed. But what emerged from genetic testing during that same trip proved even more significant. The oversized anacondas found across northern South America turned out to be an entirely separate species, one that split off from its southern relatives somewhere around 10 million years ago. We are still mapping what lives in these rivers. Past the boundary of verified measurements, the record grows murkier. The largest anaconda to enter formal scientific documentation was registered with the archives of London's Natural History Museum. An individual measuring 8.43 meters and weighing in excess of 200 kilograms. Even that record carries limited supporting detail, making independent confirmation difficult. Yet the testimonies stretching beyond this figure span centuries, continents, and entirely different cultural contexts. Throughout the 19th century, naturalists working the Amazon basin regularly filed observations of serpents measuring somewhere between 9 and 12 meters. Scientists of genuine standing, including Henry Walter Bates and Alfred Russel Wallace, considered these accounts credible enough to preserve in their written records. Neither man, however, personally encountered anything close to those dimensions on their own expeditions. In 1907, British expedition leader Percy Fawcett put his name to a claim of having come across a serpent exceeding 18 meters. No physical evidence was retained, no specimen made it back. Years afterward, Fawcett launched another expedition into the Amazon interior. He was never heard from again. Shortly after 1910, former United States President Theodore Roosevelt announced a standing offer of $50,000 to anyone who could produce a living anaconda exceeding 10 meters at the Bronx Zoo. Not a single person ever attempted to collect it. More recently, in 2016, workers excavating a site in the Brazilian state of Pará reported uncovering a serpent they estimated beyond 10 meters. No proper documentation followed. More than a century of sightings, the same outcome every time. Never quite enough to close the case, never quite enough to close it the other way either. Which forces a more fundamental question. Is it even biologically plausible for a predator of that magnitude to exist? The fossil record has already answered that. And the answer is yes. Roughly 60 million years back, during a period geologists call the Paleocene, a serpent called Titanoboa was thriving in what is now the northern edge of South America. Its bones were recovered from the Cerrejón coal formation in Colombia, first extracted in the early 2000s and formally classified for science in 2009. Titanoboa was no freak occurrence. It sat within the boa superfamily, the same extended lineage that gave rise to the anaconda. Shared anatomy, shared prey handling strategy, simply executed at a magnitude that has no living equivalent. Length estimates put it at 15 meters. Body width approaching a full meter at its thickest. Mass calculations suggest it exceeded a metric ton. No serpent confirmed anywhere in the fossil record comes close. Researchers believe its primary prey were large caiman-like reptiles, apex predators in their own right already occupying these waterways. The existence of Titanoboa establishes one thing beyond argument. Given the right environmental inputs, snakes are biologically capable of reaching sizes that have no parallel in the modern world. The question that follows naturally is, what inputs produced that result? For a long time, the prevailing answer was heat. Snakes regulate their body temperature through their surroundings rather than through internal metabolism. The Paleocene tropics ran considerably hotter than today. Higher ambient temperatures would have accelerated metabolic function, extended growth periods, and pushed maximum body size upward. It seemed like a clean explanation. Increasingly, though, researchers are questioning whether thermal conditions alone get you to Titanoboa's scale. Many now argue that the structure of the ancient ecosystem was just as important as the climate. The Amazon of 60 million years ago bore little resemblance to its modern form. Vast, slow-moving river systems and sprawling inland wetlands covered far greater portions of the landscape than they do today. These shallow, nutrient-dense waters could sustain enormous fish populations and dense concentrations of aquatic prey. And they were shared with other large-bodied predators, members of an extinct crocodilian group called the Darasauridae, some of which measured between 5 and 6 meters. Titanoboa was not a lone giant in an otherwise ordinary world. It was the apex of an entire ecosystem calibrated for scale, an entire world built around giants, right here, in this same basin. That brings us to the central question. Could today's Amazon still sustain something in that category? Evidence from living animals suggests the capacity is not entirely gone. The largest verified black caimans in current records approach 6 meters, suggesting this ecosystem can still support apex predators whose size rivals those of the ancient period. Whether it could extend that same support to an outsized serpent is a separate matter. But the foundation is already there, and a giant snake is already living here. That is not speculation. The anaconda holds the distinction of being the heaviest snake currently confirmed on Earth. Reticulated pythons may edge them in outright length, but they carry far less mass per meter. A fully developed anaconda can outweigh a python of comparable length by close to double. The gap that remains between even the largest documented anacondas and Titanoboa's estimated dimensions is significant. But the biological case for closing some of that gap is not as thin as it might seem. Individuals that approach the ceiling of what their species can produce biologically are vanishingly uncommon. For every animal that pushes against those outer limits, tens of thousands live and die without coming close. And no living serpent is better positioned to test those limits than the anaconda. Its feeding range covers both underwater and terrestrial environments, giving it access to a wider and more variable prey base than most predators can draw on. Beyond that, reptiles in the anaconda's lineage never reach a fixed adult size. Scientists describe this as continuous growth. The body keeps expanding for as long as the animal survives and maintains adequate nutrition. Anacondas in the wild regularly reach their mid-20s and beyond. Then there is the factor that may matter most of all. The anaconda spends the overwhelming majority of its life in the water. That changes the physics of what is possible. On land, body mass becomes its own enemy. As an animal scales up, gravitational load increases faster than muscular and skeletal structure can compensate. Mobility suffers. Organ function is strained. There is a ceiling, and it is enforced by physics. In the water, that ceiling moves. Buoyancy distributes the load that gravity would otherwise concentrate. The body is supported from every direction simultaneously. The constraints that cap terrestrial body size simply do not translate to an aquatic environment in the same way. The single most massive animal ever to exist on Earth, the blue whale, achieved that size in water. That is not coincidence. Water alone does not produce giant snakes, but it dismantles the gravitational barrier that prevents them from developing. It is why the heaviest serpents alive today are invariably found in river systems and flooded terrain rather than on dry ground. And it is why, if any living animal has the toolkit to push significantly beyond what the record currently shows, it would be an anaconda operating in the deep interior of the Amazon, which makes the absence of hard evidence more puzzling, not less. A 2025 publication drawing on 12 consecutive years of anaconda tracking in the Peruvian Amazon addressed that puzzle directly. The research team attached GPS-enabled transmitters to a group of anacondas and monitored their positions continuously. What they found was striking. Even with exact coordinates in hand, researchers could only visually locate a snake in roughly 1 out of every 6 attempts. The rest of the time, the animals were entirely out of sight, wedged beneath submerged timber, tucked into hollows, along flooded embankments, or buried beneath decomposing vegetation with only their nostrils breaking the waterline. These were marked, monitored animals in a zone where researchers were actively looking for them. Now extend that logic outward. The Amazon's scientific presence is heavily concentrated near navigable main channels and established communities. Moving beyond those corridors into remote tributaries or seasonally inundated interior forests demands weeks of river travel under difficult conditions. Sustaining research programs in those areas is logistically prohibitive for most institutions. And beyond even those hard-to-reach zones lies an interior that has simply never been methodically examined. River networks, flooded forest systems, and wetland expanses where no research team has ever spent meaningful time. In environments like those, an animal of almost any size could pass an entire lifespan without being recorded, and even death would leave no trace. Tropical rainforests are among the most hostile places on Earth for the preservation of biological remains. Sustained heat, near constant humidity, and highly acidic forest soils decompose organic material at a rate that leaves almost nothing behind. A large animal can vanish completely within a single wet season. Bone does not last. Soft tissue dissolves faster. Dense vegetation prevents aerial detection of carcasses. Exposed geological strata, the rock formations where fossils actually form, are nearly absent throughout most of the basin. Titanoboa's remains survived only because of a geological accident. The Cerrejón coal formation happened to preserve bone under conditions that almost nowhere else in the region could replicate. Every specimen of Titanoboa ever found has come from that one site, a single mine representing a species whose range once covered an enormous portion of a continent. Eliminate that mine, and Titanoboa does not exist. Not in the record, not in the science, not in any form we could point to. Which means the following question is not rhetorical. If there are sediment layers elsewhere across South America, layers from periods much closer to the present that have never been excavated, what might they contain? Are there species that lived here after Titanoboa, persisting into eras we think of as modern, that simply left nothing we have found yet? The Amazon does not give things up easily. It absorbs them. It breaks them down. It holds on to whatever it chooses to hold on to, and releases the rest as if it was never there. Some questions about what moves through these waters may never be answered, not because the answer does not exist, but because the place that holds it has not yet decided to let it go.